conscience. What is conscience? And this video is about like how our conscience works. And this hopefully is to give an idea of how to use conscience training um, as a means of the observation. So this isn't about saying that one side, this is a right way and this is a wrong way. I actually want to show how things are wrong and how there's truth mixed in both aspects of this. So let's start by saying that Milgram, Stanley Milgram in the 60s did an experiment where he wanted to find out at what point people would go to their conscience and make a decision based upon their conscience versus putting an authority that says no, you don't have to follow your conscience. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to find out if regular people would instill pain to another human being if there was an authority there to justify the behavior. Well, Milgram had sent out a survey before this to a bunch of other psychologists and psychiatrists, and it was a resounding, the hypothesis was resounding statement that said that with how extreme this experiment was going to be, he was going to be placing like 450 volts, pretending to put 450 volts of electricity into another human being, and the other person, the regular person, was going to have to do that. And so they all thought that like nobody would actually, the only like deviants would actually push the button to 450 volts on another human being because they just thought that their conscience would stop them. And the results were what was incredible. And there's a movie about this called The Experimenter, by the way, very interesting study. What they actually found was over 60% of participants pushed the person to push the button to 450 volts of pain because they were being influenced by an outside authority. And so what that tells us is that yes, we can all agree that we have a conscience. We do absolutely have this innate sense of not wanting to hurt other people. It's also been studied there was a general who wrote a study and a book about this, about how if without a proper authority at the front lines with their soldiers, they would find that only 10 to 15% of soldiers would either fire the gun or fire it on target. So if they weren't there, only 10 to 15% would actually shoot to kill. When an authority says that it's okay, then a much higher amount of soldiers will actually shoot to kill. So what this tells us is that our conscience and our behavior can be dictated by outside influences. And if you look at what has happened in our past, if we look at the egregious things that we agreed to, Hitler's always the go-to. Hitler never killed anybody with his own hands, but he influenced enough people to do it to justify the fact that they were better and there was a better race and this kind of thing. So basically, he was the authority to override massive amounts of people with conscience. So, this is not about the dualistic idea of what I would call conscience training, and what this is like messages and authorities telling people that your conscience is a great way to live and to follow that guidance system. And I would call that conscience training. And I would say that at the basis of a lot of philosophies and religions is like to push your compassion, to find and harness your conscience. And it's a natural ability that doesn't want us to harm other people, but to actually go against the influences outside of you in order to not, kill other people and want to harm other people. And the other side of that is in war, when you have an authority saying it's okay to kill, I would call that it training. And what that means is that what we have to do is we have to create a justification within people to say that it's okay to go ahead and kill these people. So basically, what we have to do is we have to remove the humanity from them, and I would call that it training. Okay, because what we're doing is we're declassifying that human being in our mind to be able to cause that person harm. And these are really extreme examples, and I use these examples because it will, it bites. The contrast bites. Another example would be like, at what point, if an intruder came into your home, at what point do you have the right to use lethal force? And then in our culture, we'll have people saying that if somebody breaks into your house, it doesn't matter whatsoever. So their story is, their it training is that you can go against your conscience when, when somebody just walks onto your property. So your property is so important that you're able to dehumanize that person and kill that person. And then conscience trainers on the other side would say, if they came in, they might say, well, some relatively less extreme might say, you have to see and know that you're in mortal danger to do any kind of danger. You have to use, appropriate force. You don't just get to shoot to kill like right away. But the extreme would say it doesn't matter. Like if somebody comes in that's just meant to be take the bullet, whatever else, turn the other cheek, whatever the justification is. But you see, so the premise of this video isn't to make one of these it training or conscience training right or wrong, but it's to look at it's to use terminology that allows people to, and it allows me to monitor or make conscious effort to look at how somebody's trying to justify or to train me to see the world. And so, because there's danger in both sides, and some people might say that, oh, loving kindness and conscience is really the way to go. That's what we got to do is do that. Well, the interesting thing is that we can actually override our conscience the other way, and meaning that it training has us justified it to the point so we can dehumanize somebody so that we can justify our behavior. Okay? In conscience training, we can override our conscience to dehumanize ourself in order to let somebody walk over the top of us. So meaning that that's codependency. Exactly. So we then do, and do you see the control aspect of this? It's a little bit of both. What we actually then have to do is we have to dehumanize ourselves. So we're actually it training ourselves in order to allow, the what we believe to be the truth. That in loving kindness, I would just, in any situation, let the other person and expand and make the other person the most important. And a really good example of how this is really like the tug of war that's being taken place in the United States right now is the tug of war about immigration. And it's happening in many other cultures and that sort of thing. And it's like, if you look at the extremes on both sides, the extreme on one side is like, they're never supposed to be here. If they come here, they should just, we can justify sticking children into cages. We can justify, harming them and detaining them for as long as we want. We can dehumanize them, and basically that's it training to say that we need to, in order to stop these people coming in, we can do anything by any means. And on the other side of that is the extremists on the other side would say we shouldn't have any kind of wall, there should be no barrier between countries, and that anybody can just, come in and we'll take every human, at any time. Every country that, is doing well should just take every single human. And I don't want to say that, maybe that's an idealistic thing that at one point we see everybody as one, but we're not in a point where we have enough agreements between cultures that that would be possible. So I would just make that argument that, you know, there could be some gray space between, treating people, dehumanizing them, sticking them in cages, separating from their children. We can take that as an extreme. And then on the other side, I can say that having just complete wide open borders in this level of consciousness is just not, it's just not appropriate. And what's interesting in our culture is that, the extremists on the right, you call it the right or the left, or on these two sides, they're getting all the attention, but most people are pretty pragmatic. They're also empathetic to people, that are coming over, but then they see, so it's like, where's it coming from? So the whole idea of this video is just to say, this is the way that I will, and I will even interject this in conversation. If somebody wants to bring up politics with me and they want to tell me their point, is I will say to them, this seems like it training. If they're going to the point where they're justifying any means possible, if they're telling me it's okay to stick kids into cages, I will say that's, are you it training me right now? Are you telling me that I can go against my natural instincts as a human being to depersonalize this person, dehumanize this person enough to where I can punish them? And so the whole idea is self-reflection, everything beyond me. So how can I see, because through my life, my views on all of this have changed. And it's because I've been influenced by, the rightness of having borders. There was a time where I didn't want to have borders. And then, and then there was the time when I was more conservative and said, it was okay to be not so nice to people because they were actually doing something bad. And I would say that in somewhere, plucking from the truths that apply to either side brings me to a place of understanding and interdependency, rather than, basically the way that I see absolute conscience training or it training on one side is just pure narcissism, and on the other side is pure conscience training leads to codependency, the justification to be codependent. And when you begin to pluck the correct, or you pluck what's true, and then you also know from your own inner guidance system the truth, then you're operating on conscience, and then conscience becomes your guide rather than outside influences. And then basically you can go about trying to harness, or for me, it was always trying to find that middle point, because narcissism and codependency, I have found, easily are destructive forces in the world. The need to control is the basis of the control complex. And most people would think that narcissism is the wrong one and codependency is okay. No, codependency enables narcissism. And it continues to go on, and I have uncovered where I have been played the codependent in order to be, my conscience training took me to being over conscience, and figured out that, I was actually hurting people when I thought I was helping them. So what I was doing was ceding control to the narcissist idea in order for me to gain power, because you get power by either ceding or exerting control.